I think we have time for 3 questions open to the audience.
My name is Clemens Hoffmann from the Fraunhofer Institute for Wind Energy and Energy System Technology. I have one question to Simon. You have this publication on myths of future system. One of this was about backup power. You said there's one-to-one. It's probably not necessary or is a myth. Could you comment on that? What's your stance on the necessary backup in the future?
Can we have 2 more questions and then the panelists can respond together? I think here at the center, yeah.
Hello, this is Devi from India Energy Storage Alliance. My question is to Jacqueline. You mentioned about very low curtailment in future, but considering the current scenario, the curtailment percentage might go high based on the Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan and Maharashtra scenario. And the second is you considered about the coal plant to charge the batteries in future, but why can't this curtailed power can use for the battery charging, and which is, you mentioned, very low percentage of battery for future. And I went through the NREL study fully, and I found that EV charging impact on the grid is not considered.
Sorry, what is not considered? I just want to get the question right.
EV charging impact on the Indian grid.
Electric charging. One more question from there, yeah.
My name is Pavitra. I represent DNVGL, and my question here is for Jacqueline as well. So while compensating for the RE penetration, have you considered the ancillary services as well?
Thank you, Simon, please.
Yeah, just briefly to the question of backup requirement on the system. So the most extreme version of this myth is that for every megawatt of wind and solar you build, you need to build 1 megawatt of firm capacity, and again in the most extreme version right next to it. And I think a good reminder for this is if you consider existing conventional plants, they also have a possibility that they might fail unexpectedly on the system. Now, the answer that we found for that is not that we build a backup plant right next to it, but we actually invented the whole idea of an interconnected power system in terms of, in order to share resources and ensure reliability in this way. So the first thing is to look at the reliability impact from a systems perspective. And there you have a differentiated impact on the different reserve requirements. And when it comes to the amount of capacity that can be relied upon to meet demand at all times, there you simply need to do a proper assessment of the capacity credit, so in the form of an effective load carrying capability assessment, where you take into account the stochastic nature of wind and solar, but even despite this nature, they can make a contribution to the reliability of the system, and therefore they themselves can provide firm capacity to the system. It depends, of course, on system circumstances. This percentage goes up if you increase the footprint of operation. There's a lot more that could be said about this, but maybe I'll just leave it at this.
Okay, so the first part of the question was why we see low curtailment in this study. There are a few factors. One is that is aggregated nationally. When you look at state level amounts, that number, you know, for a high RE state, that could be higher. A second is that this version that I presented doesn't show constraints that could happen from local, like intrastate transmission congestion, or if there, you know, for example, before the Tamil Nadu experienced higher RE curtailment levels before they increased their intrastate transmission. So that's a factor which we looked at in our regional study, but for the national study, we wanted to put that aside so that we could look at those other aspects like coal flexibility without it getting, without having to perfectly predict the transmission and generation locations within states. And then also we do have a lot more renewable energy in the future, and there is a smoothing effect to that variability that we get when we have it over a broader area. So like you could see with that wind how smooth it was over nationally, and that makes it a little easier to handle. the third part of your question was on EVs, and so no, we didn't look at electric vehicles when we started this. There wasn't a high electric vehicle target, and but we do have a demand response part of our work which is underway, where we are looking at the role of demand response, and that should be out next year. Ancillary services also, that was outside the scope of our study. We were looking at the balancing energy timescales. That ancillary services is an important question. We do anticipate there being changes to how reserves might be held. In some cases, reserves might be less because wind and solar can contribute to downward reserves, up to if you curtail some of it, but wind and solar have a role to play. That the amount of reserves to be able to handle uncertainty and variability can vary over the time of year. So we anticipate that looking forward, an optimized system will have some changes. We did not look at that though for this study. We are conducting a follow-up study with POSICO and hopefully some others too, looking at the dynamic stability of the system under these high RE penetration levels.
Sorry, just one small question. Would the result of, or the findings of, this is Rajshekar here, way back, would your results have been any different if your timescale modeling was different from much smaller than 15 minutes?
So we held reserves according to the regulations, the secondary and tertiary reserves according to regulations. We did not dispatch the reserves. So we made sure that we always kept some generation just held. If we looked into shorter time, like if our study was at 5 minutes, then we could hold even fewer reserves to accommodate the changes within the 5 minutes, likely.
I think it is time to sum up. And one good thing about the three presentations is that there was a lot of harmony in terms of approach and thought process in all the three presentations. Simon emphasized emphatically that if you intend to reach a very high level of RE penetration, and that to cost effectively, you would need a system-wide transformation. So he then went on to explain the need for a holistic approach in terms of institutional, economic and technical aspects. And more importantly, he also touched upon the market design, what kind of changes that you need in terms of the policy, regulatory framework or the market design itself, and emphasized on three key issues which in any case in India we have been dealing with. One, the least cost dispatch model, which is one theme which is common and running across all the three presentations that I saw, and trading closer to real time. That's one point which came up during the first session itself. And larger balancing area, larger areas for balancing. So these were some of the things. There were other aspects, but I was trying to capture some of the key themes and messages that came from Simon. And then Jacqueline's was basically a case study which reinforced all these viewpoints that Simon gave, and the study which we have all been involved in here in India, and Jacqueline has been working on it for last 2 years. This also shows and finds cost-saving opportunities if you adopt a particular market design. What she has been talking about in this study is a sort of centralized dispatch model. If you have all the units or the unit commitment at the centralized level, at the national level, you will be able to better and cost effectively integrate the target, the renewable energy target that you have of 100 gigawatt of solar and 60 wind. She has also shown a couple of other scenarios as well, which will be more cost effective. But then again, for this you need a different kind of a market model, which is again based on economic dispatch model, which also flows from what Simon mentioned. And she also emphasized on the need for harnessing flexibility. Some of the key recommendations that this study has thrown are being studied in depth by the policymakers and the regulators in India. These are based on data and empirical data that we have here in India, but some of the experiences of the West have been built into it in trying to find out a solution for India. But as we said, that every country has its uniqueness in terms of the market design, the institutional arrangement. How you move from one step to another is a big challenge, which India as a country has been passing through as of now. Lakshmi's presentation also, we have been involved, at least at CERC, very closely. And there also she has emphasized on the economic dispatch and regional coordination. In fact, the USP of this study is the need for a regional coordination, which got echoed in the first session in Tamil Nadu, which is a very important state in terms of renewable integration. They have also been emphasizing on the need for some sort of a umbrella agreement for regional coordination and cooperation, which can help better mitigate the variations and the jerks being created by the wind and solar in the state. And I also mentioned that at CERC we are trying to work on some market models, because there is one school of thought which believes that possibly in India we need to move one step forward from the regional cooperation and coordination to a national level cooperation and coordination, because you could be having in India a region where you have only surpluses and not deficits. So you need both surplus and deficit in a region for a meaningful coordination and cooperation to happen. So as things are moving here in India, we are debating on some of the suggestions and recommendations which have been made in the primer of NARUC, and which E3 has worked on, and also working on based on our own experiences in terms of how the country should move forward. And I briefly mentioned one lesson possibly that is appearing to be quite relevant for India at this moment is to work on a intraday, closer to real-time energy market, which is missing today. But then there are implications, and we are trying to study internally before we come up with a white paper for wide discussion with the stakeholders. So we have a lot to learn from the international experiences, and I thank all the panelists for their insight, and especially the case studies that have been presented and which have been really very helpful and insightful for us policymakers and regulators in the country. Thanks. Thank you very much.